So we are rolling in this week, starting into one of the most important parts of Christian history. This time of the year that we celebrate every year, called Easter. The two major time periods in the church that we celebrate, you have Easter, you have Christmas. We all know the story of Christmas. It's the time when Jesus was born. We celebrate his birth to Mary, who we talked about last week in our service. And it rolls around, and now we're into this time period in our culture, in our history, where things just kind of seem to slow down a little bit for us. You know, Christmas, you've got all the bright lights, you've got all the exciting, Christmas music, and you have Christmas trees, you have all the decorations. Then we roll into Easter, and things kind of tend to, like I said, they slow down a little bit. But we celebrate it every year because it marks a change. It marks a change in the seasons where we go from being cold to starting to warm up a little bit. And not only does it mark that change, but it also marks a change in the Bible itself. It's this time period where the cross and the resurrection and all this stuff, it splits the Bible into two parts. The Old Testament, the New Testament. We have essentially in the Bible exactly what this series is called, the before and the after. We have the before period of history that hits everything leading up to Jesus' birth, all of the prophecies, all of the Bible stories that we grow up with and that we've heard and that we love. And then after the resurrection, after the crucifixion, all of these things, we know what those things are. When we go in there, we see a before and after picture. Think about this for a second. When was the last time you actually had a before and after picture of something? We know what it is. We know what it looks like. You have this picture of the thing that you want to see, the thing you start up with. Maybe you're taking up working out for the first time and you take a before picture and you see all the imperfections and you hope that the after period is going to give you the finished product, that thing that's going to be the perfection of what you were hoping for. We use them for everything. We use them when we do a renovation project at home, whether it's a painting, whether you've gone in and you've built something, or maybe you've added to, or maybe you've gone in and you're doing your nails, or maybe you're getting a new haircut, maybe you're growing a beard. Who knows? But we all know what the before and after looks like. We do them with our diet plans. We do it with renovations. We even do it with natural disasters. We put it all side by side because we like to see progress. We like to see the old going away and the new things happening. The thing with before and afters is this: they always, always, always mark a change. They celebrate a change in something. And in terms of the church, the before and after pictures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, they mark and symbolize and show us what the before and after relationship with God looks like. It changes and shows us what it looked like to have a relationship with God before the cross and after the cross. And it's actually a lot easier than what we remember and what we think of. For example, in the beginning, probably the most famous 3 words in all of human history. In the beginning. It marks newness. It marks something that never existed, something that had never been before. The coming of something that would change and really create history for all of humanity. This place where God said, I'm not okay with the way things are. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he said, let there be light. He created human beings. Human beings come on the scene, and there's something that has never happened before, because they were created specifically for the point of relationship with God. And it brings us to kind of this weird place when we think about God, because we know what we picture when we think of God. In fact, A.W. Tozer once wrote that the most important thing about a person is what comes to their mind when they think about God. Because that gives us kind of a picture of the idea of before and after. It gives us this glimpse into what we were created for and what we believe about Easter and about the cross and about the resurrection. Because when those things come to our mind, it gives us a really good idea of where we stand. In the beginning, the first 3 words of the Bible, the most important 3 words in human history, the most recognizable ones. They're there because this is the very beginning, not just of time, but also our before. So you can't have an after without a before. You've got to start from somewhere, and that's what this is. See, God creates all of these things. He creates the earth, the heavens, the plants, the animals, humans. He creates water. He creates all of these things, and he creates humans specifically to have relationship with him. And everything is great. Everything is going the way that it's supposed to. Human beings are there. They're walking face to face with God. They're talking with God. Adam and Eve are tending to the garden. They're taking care of everything the way they're supposed to be. And then something happens that changes everything. And it happens when a serpent causes Eve to second guess the relationship that mankind has with God. And we know what it looks like. We see it happen. The serpent comes and looks at Eve and says, did God really say that you can't eat from any of the trees in the garden or else you'll die? And she said, no, that's not what he said. He said, we can eat of any tree we want to, but we can't eat from this particular tree over here. And the serpent looks at Eve and says, well, you know why, don't you? Because he knows that if you eat of that tree, you eat that fruit, your eyes are going to be open and you're going to be like him. And then we kind of see something really unfortunate happen. In Genesis chapter 3, verses 6 and 7, we see this. Okay, so when the woman, talking about Eve, saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes. So it wasn't even that it was just good for food, but it was pretty to look at. Maybe it had flowers on it. Maybe, I don't know if you've ever seen like an apple tree or an orange tree or even a cherry blossom that's in the midst of growing its fruit. They're beautiful. You're drawn to them. And this is what she says. It says, when she saw that it was good for food, but that it was also a delight of the eyes, and the tree was to be desired to make one wise. It says she took of its fruit and she ate it. And then she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And then the unfortunate thing happens. It says the eyes of both of them were opened. This is the before. This marks as humanity, our before relationship with God. See, this is both an after and a before, because we had a before, what it looked like, what it was supposed to be. And then we enter into an after, where now we're in a place where things are different. But the garden was the ultimate before. It was the place where before the cross we had a relationship with God in the garden. And then as the Bible unfolds, we see things kind of shift off. We see sin enter the garden through the serpent, through Adam and Eve eating the fruit. And it changes the course of our story. It changes the course of every single thing that we know about what God wanted to have happen. Sin enters in, it changes everything. The story unfolds, and later in the book of Genesis, we see the same man that we met 2 weeks ago, Abraham. God promises him that he's going to become the father of many nations. And the before continues to unfold. We see tribe after tribe after tribe born. We see people having kids. They grow up. There's this place where they're starting to learn what it looks like to relate to God. But then there's this steady walking away from God. There's this steady increase in movement away from this relationship with God. Sin continues to roll its way through. We see it get to the point where the walking away from God has gotten so bad that God calls a man named Noah. He says, I want you to build a gigantic, enormous boat because I'm about to do something that I never thought I would ever do. I'm about to flood this creation that I made, that I love so much. And I'm going to eliminate everybody except for you and your family. Noah follows through, and we know the story. We see Noah go in and they build the ark. He's ridiculed. The floods come. They rise up. He takes the ark filled with the animals, and they're out in the waters, and the floods recede. And they come back into place, and they start over brand new. And God starts with a clean slate with Noah and his family. And then we see things continue on from there, and we see Joseph, this young boy who ends up becoming the prince, second in command of Egypt under the Pharaoh. His family's brought in during a famine, and they settle there. The entire Hebrew nation, the Israelites, they set up in Egypt. Time passes, and Pharaoh becomes so upset with what's happening. He sees the Hebrews multiplying in number, and he says, you know what, this is not okay. Something needs to be done. So he puts an order out to have all boys under a certain age to be completely eliminated. Well, one of the little boys ends up making his way through, and he grows up to be a young man named Moses. Moses ends up being sent back into Egypt by God to bring the people of Israel out of Egypt so that they can create a new place, a new thing. And this really, in all honesty, in terms of relating to God, this is where we begin to see the embodiment of the rest of the before. And where we begin to see the relationship take on a different form. Up to this point, God's kind of, for the most part, kind of left things alone and kind of said, here's what I want you to do, now go do it. And now he steps into history and says, no, I want to do something different. So he steps in. Moses, the Israelites, they leave, and they find themselves in the middle of this desert. And God says, Moses, I want you to come up to the top of the mountain. I want you to write down everything that I'm about to tell you. And so we see this unfold. He goes up, he carves out on this tablet the 10 commandments, these 10 guidelines for what it looks like to relate to God and to relate to people, along with several hundred other laws that he puts in place. But then he also institutes sacrifices. He puts into place 2 main types of sacrifices. One is voluntary, the kind of sacrifice that you go and you do specifically to show thanks or to worship God and to say, you know what, because you've done this for me, I'm going to do this for you. And then the other one was a mandatory sacrifice, the kind that you would do specifically because, you know what, I have to do this because I messed up the relationship and I want the relationship to be okay. There were 2 different kinds of those types of sacrifices, of the mandatory ones. One was done in case you had sins that you knew you did, that you did on purpose, and then ones that you did in case, well, you know what, I may have sinned and not realized it, so these were the ones that you offered this sacrifice for, the ones that were the unintentional sins that you did. Okay, so now you've got God who sets up this before, this relational aspect of it, and he's laid out all these laws. Well, why in the world are there so many of them? Why did he take the time to put all of these laws, all of these rules, all of these regulations in place? Well, he gives us the answer. Okay, he gives us the answer to this. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 17, verse 7, he says, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And then in Exodus chapter 6, verse 7, he says this, I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the burdens out of the Egyptians. Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 23, God says this, but this command I gave them, obey my voice, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people, and walk in all the way that I command you, that it may be well with you. Why in the world were there so many laws? Why in the world were there so many regulations? It's simple. It's impossible to have a relationship without having some guidelines, without having barriers, without knowing how to interact with each other. My wife and I, we have a relationship. I have a relationship with her. We know how to communicate. We know how to interact with each other. I know what things are going to make her mad. She knows what things are going to make me mad. And on the flip side of that, I know how to come back and try to mend the fences. This is the same thing with God. This is the reason why he laid out all of these regulations, all of these rules, these stipulations, because he wanted to restore his position with the Israelites. He had already told Abraham, I'm going to establish a covenant between me and you and your offspring. I will be your God and you will be my people. This was something that was completely foreign to the nation that existed in Israel. They had come up through so many different generations. They lived in this place in Egypt where there were so many gods and so many rules to follow. If you made one god mad, you may end up missing something. And you had to have something in place to make amends and to make things right because you wanted that relationship with that God to be solid. So this is what they were used to. This is what they knew. The gods that they were around in Egypt had rules that had to be followed. They had to know what their role was. Because the reality is, in the bottom line of every single bit to do with this idea of before and after and relating to God is that you have to have your role nailed down before you can have a relationship. Before you can have a relationship, you have to know your role. Before you can have a relationship, you have to know your role. Before I can have a relationship with my wife, before we started dating, I had to know where I stood with her. Before I had a relationship with some of you that are watching right now, I had to know where I stood with you. We had to have common ground somewhere. We had to understand who was who and what role we played in each other's life. As the pastor of a church, I cannot pastor the church relationally until I know what role I play in the life of the church. And when it comes to God, you cannot have a relationship with God unless you know what your role is and what his role is. That's why we see the rules and regulations put in place. He put these in place because Israel had a history of being their own God. Look all the way back to before Noah. Mankind had a history of placing themselves above God. Even Adam and Eve, you go all the way back and you see this pattern start with them of eating the fruit that they were told not to eat, placing themselves in the role of God of their own destiny. The same pattern continues over and over and over throughout history. You see God saying, I want to have a relationship with you. Over and over and over through the Old Testament, he says, listen, if you will just be my people and let me be your God, we will be okay. It will work. He had already reminded them of their role leading into this. He had already sent plagues into Egypt to show Pharaoh that he was above the gods of Egypt. And to remind the Israelites, listen, you may think you're God, but this is what God looks like. He has the ability to control the weather, to control insects and animals. He can control nature itself, including death. And then when they were out in the desert, he said, you know what? I'm going to remind you again that I am God and that I want a relationship with you by taking care of you. You're hungry. I get it. So I'm going to send you something every morning for you to gather and eat for that day, so that you can be reminded that I care about you enough and I want relationship with you enough that I'm willing to do this. And reminding them even before they even got out of Egypt, again, they were stuck between a rock and a hard place with the Egyptian army coming up behind them and the sea in front of them. And God splits the sea in half so the entire nation of Israel can walk across on dry land. The entire before story up to this point is geared towards reminding us of our role in who God is in the story. God is the creator. God is the sovereign. He is the one who has control over all of it. And I'm even going to go as far as saying that desperately wants a relationship with us. Otherwise, the after doesn't matter. The only way to have a relationship is to understand your role. And that's the entire point of what God does in the beginning. And he goes in, and this is the great thing, this is the thing I love about God, is he knew that it would be impossible for humanity to keep all of those rules. He knew it wasn't possible. He gave the rules and the regulations to Moses and said, take this back to the people, okay? Here is now your before. This is your before. I'm going to set 10 guidelines down. I'm going to tell you how I want everything else to be done. All the way down to how I want you to make amends with me and for you to be able to have a way to show me how great you think I am when I do the things that are unbelievable. See, in the book of Jeremiah, it takes it even a step further because he knew it wouldn't last. He made another promise. In Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 33, God says this. He says, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them and I will write it on their hearts. And here's this phrase again. I will be their God, and they will be my people. He knew they couldn't keep the promise. And he said, so, well, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. Here's the covenant. Here's the promise that I'm going to make with the house of Israel. After all of these things, I am going to put my law within them. I'm going to put it where they are with them. He knew there was going to be an after. He knew the before wouldn't last. He knew he was going to have to do something new in order to make the relationship work. So he said, I am going to send my law to be with you, to become part of the innermost parts of who you are. I'm going to send it in such a way that if you will let it become part of you, it will completely overwrite the before. That word's kind of a terrifying thing, overwrite. If you have ever done anything on a computer and you've ever had to save something that you've changed by accident and you see overwrite and you accidentally click yes, we see it as a bad thing because you've lost everything up to that point. God sees it as a way to rebuild what was already messed up and to rebuild what was broken by sending his son to come in to completely rewrite what it looks like to have a relationship with him. This would be a chance to completely rewrite human history. The before was gone, and the after would remain. God saw the opportunity to change the before. Not because he had messed up, but because he wanted so much to have a relationship with us. He knew in advance that we would never be able to make the before work. So he had already planned for the after. Now, for a lot of us, we're stuck in the before. We're stuck there because for us, the rules and the regulations, they make us happy on the inside because they give us structure. They give us a framework to work around. And honestly, even for some of the people that came up before Jesus was born, they were the same way. They liked the rules. They liked the regulations. They liked the structure because it gave them a framework to build their relationship around. They understood even then that in order to have a relationship with God, you had to understand your role. The problem was they leaned too much into the before, and it ended up causing more of an issue for them because they started loving the before so much that they continued adding to it and adding to it and adding to it until it got to the point where it was almost impossible to have a relationship with God. Which brought us to the need for the after, which is why we celebrate this time of year. Not because of the before, we celebrate because of the after. The after is built around one simple passage of Scripture, and it's this: that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It was the potential for the after that caused Jesus to come take care of our before. Not because of who we were, but because of who he is. I have no idea what's going on in your world. I have no idea what kind of things have happened this week. I have no idea what kind of things you sat down this morning and went, you know what? It's Sunday, so I have to do this and this and this and this and this in order to feel like I've had a relationship with God today. No. The before was temporary. The after is forever. I want to ask you a question. If God were to look into your life right now, would he see someone that is simply focused on the things or someone who is focused on him? Which one is it? Because it's one or the other. It can't be both. You can't focus on the things, the rules and the regulations, and focus on the cross. It's not possible. Because you will always lean to one or the other if you try to split your focus. Here's my challenge for us today. The entire point of a before is to build off of it so that you can have the after. It's a renovation process. It's a rebuilding. My challenge for you is to say one 3-word prayer. This isn't a salvation thing, this is just a humanity thing. And it's this: build my life. Don't settle for the before. Let God go in and start rebuilding you from the inside out so that you can have the after he so desperately deserves or desires for you. Build my life. Because before you can have relationship, you have to know your role. When you realize how big God is, then you free him up to rebuild what's there so the relationship can begin. Father, thank you for all the weird, crazy ways that you show us that you love us. I pray that in these next few moments, that you will start renovating the hearts of your people, that you will dig in and chip away at the old before so that we can have an amazing after. Thank you for not settling and making plans to send your son so that we really could have an after with you forever. In Jesus' holy name, amen.